everyone. Thank you for coming to the Sunday morning session on knowledge and innovation. I am Danqing Wang, a third-year PhD student in strategy at INSEAD. It's my great pleasure to chair this exciting session on knowledge foundations. So, as part of the PhD training process, getting familiarized with the classical theories and thoughts is the first crucial step for us. I remember my first strategy class in my first year was called Introduction to the Foundations of Organization and Strategy. So from that class, we got to know the important theories which addresses the questions in strategy areas, such as why do firms exist, how do they compete, and what's the relationship between firms and their environments, etc. Most interesting and helpful exercise in that class we had is that each one of the participants needs to produce a visual presentation which maps out all the important relationships among all the readings in each session, which we call the mapping exercise. So on the map, we normally include the author's name, publication year, number of citations of his work, which gives us the basic idea of the popularity of his work, and also the basic assumptions and important concepts, etc. Also, by mapping out the referred research of that work and also the work that is built on his publications, we come up with our own giant intellectual map which traces the evolutionary tracks of the particular field. So that exercise significantly improves our understanding of the strategy area and also lays us the important foundations for our future research and study. So starting from this year, we are extending and replicating that idea to the SMS meeting. We are extending the idea because the SMS meeting is more exciting than the practice we had in class where we can only read the papers and count the citations. The SMS meeting actually provides us a platform to meet people who actually wrote them. So today, as in the first foundational meeting, it is our great honor to have Professor Sidney Winter with us. I'm pretty sure that everybody in this room would know Professor Winter before, but as a duty of the chair, I still would like to give a brief introduction. So Professor Winter graduated with a PhD degree in economics from Yale University in 1964, where my mom wasn't even born at the time. So, then he has worked in many world-leading research institutions such as Rand Corporation, Yale, UC Berkeley, and the University of Pennsylvania, etc. As one of the most influential scholars in management area, he has published many important works in evolutionary economics, in knowledge, in organizational learning, etc. His classic book, An Evolutionary Theory of Economic Change, has received a total citation record of more than 18,000 on Google Scholar. So undoubtedly, Professor Winter's work is the foundation for strategy. So today, we are going to do a live interview with Professor Winter on the stage. The questions have been collected in advance from the interested audience group and also from our panelists. So due to time constraints, we are unable to ask all the interested questions to Professor, and I know that probably you would have many other questions during the slot, but you are welcome to stay longer after the session to interact with us more, and also your comments and suggestions about the format of this meeting, the format of this session, the interactive session, are also highly appreciated. So I should stop and hand over to my colleagues, Alfonso and Maciek, who are also PhD students at INSEAD, and let's warmly welcome Professor Winter. Thank you.
Thank you, Danqing. When I was flying in here, I took the liberty to go through the the onboard shopping catalog that you have in front of your seat, and it's truly astounding. I don't know how many of you did go through it, but if you get a chance next time, just go through it. How many things are in there? How many things are being produced nowadays? The truth is that right now we really don't marvel at the amount and variety of things that are being produced in the world. We gathered some of the numbers for you on on this, and well, it's actually pretty amazing. And today we will talk about how extraordinary phenomena it is that we have so many things. And we're going to approach this question from the point of view of knowledge. And knowledge, because in the words of the great economist Alfred Marshall, knowledge is the most powerful engine of production. So, Professor Winter, in your work, you use the term productive knowledge. Why not just ask, why not just knowledge? I mean, why the distinction between the productive knowledge?
I've been interested in the question of the role of knowledge in getting the world's work done, and the world's work is illustrated by the production numbers that you just put on the screen. And when you think about that question, you realize that first of all, that role is a very, very large one, and also a very diverse one, ranging from, say, nuclear physics down to how to ride a bicycle, and many, many other things in between. Other types of knowledge that are prominent in the world, like scientific knowledge and mathematical knowledge and philosophical knowledge and so on, are quite different from the knowledge that matters to getting the work done in one key respect, and that is that in those areas there is a vast concern with the depth and solidity of the knowledge and its universality. On the other hand, in the economic sphere and in the sphere of production, the tests for the validity of knowledge are overwhelmingly pragmatic tests. They do not go to the question of the security of foundations. They go to the question of whether this knowledge actually helps the work get done in the here and now in this particular place. And that distinction between the knowledge that helps the work get done and these other sorts of knowledge is, in my view, so fundamental that we need a tag for it. And the two-word noun, productive knowledge, is my tag for the fact that there is this particular kind of knowledge that is important in the world, and it has many attributes which are not well suggested by other knowledge domains. So that is the reason for the tag, and it's my view that in effect productive knowledge requires its own epistemology, so to speak, which is distinct from the epistemology of science and so on, in order to help us understand it and therefore help us understand the world.
And regarding where is it located, this productive knowledge? Where would you say? Well,
that is also a point that requires a lot of emphasis. It is in the world as a whole, and in organizations, productive knowledge is distributed. It exists in little pockets of various sizes focused on particular productive tasks. And the question of how they all relate to each other is another thing that is sometimes on the agenda in a local way, but often is not on the agenda. So that specialized, distributed, situated character of the knowledge is another key attribute.
Over the course of our research prior to this meeting, we came across one of your pieces in 2001. Which mentioned an example of water temples in Bali. And would you like to share some insights from that example on how that applies to this specific situation?
Absolutely. So that discussion emerged from a paper I wrote trying to talk about these issues of the distinctions between the different kinds of knowledge. And I made the point that, of course, human beings and indeed various animal species have gotten along for a very long time without the very elaborate structures which we now have, say, surrounding the idea of scientific knowledge. And the Bali example is that the irrigation system of Bali used to be traditionally controlled by the priests of the water temples. The priests of the water temples controlled the allocation of water with an interest to dealing with the problems of simultaneous demands and pest hazards and one thing and another. But of course, there's little scientific basis for that. Well, the government came in with the benefit of modern scientific knowledge, and it changed the irrigation system of Bali, with the result that after a temporary surge, reflecting the strength of the original good idea, that production collapsed. Production collapsed because the modern system was not as good at pest control as the traditional system run by the priests of the water temples. Unfortunately, there was an anthropologist from the University of Michigan on the scene, and he recorded this story, and he also ultimately got the decision reversed and restored the traditional agriculture and its productivity.
Professor Winter, so regarding this notion of productive knowledge, from what you describe is more of a collective nature, whereas in common sense terms, when we think about knowledge in individual terms. Also, in the words of Herbert Simon, organizational learning takes place inside human heads. So, to in your understanding, what are the main differences between the notions of organizational versus individual knowledge?
I have to say I disagree with Simon on that statement. I might say that, to be fair to the late great man, he followed, as I believe, those words with some words of qualification, which were, to my mind, more accurate on the subject than the original statement was. And those qualifications start from the fact that although those individual heads are obviously very, very important, they operate in organizations in a shared context, and they have, to some degree, shared experience in that context as well. And the shared context includes all of the artifacts, typically the property of the organization, with which they are systematically surrounded, including, very importantly nowadays, computers. And other devices of external memory, which are very useful to the individual heads that Simon featured. So those things make a tremendous difference. As for the shared experience, it's the shared experience that ultimately lies behind organizational routines, and organizational routines are the expression of what experience has done for your coordination. You know, how you got to a reliable, systematic way of doing things that permits the knowledge and contributions of different participants to be effectively coordinated. So together, the factors of context and experience create something at the organizational level which clearly transcends the individual contributions in a significant way.
So, Professor Winter, one of the biggest contributions of your work to the knowledge of organization is this notion of routine. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the routine is and what functions does it perform in the organization?
As far as the function is concerned, I just suggested the central function that routines play is that they provide a pattern of coordination which can be reinstantiated, reinitiated, repeated without having to go through the process of actively coordinating the activity and doing the original learning over again. So in that respect, organizational routines are, as we say in the book, they're analogous to individual skills, and one way of thinking about organizational routines is as multi-person skills, which the cues that are guiding action are being passed back and forth in a group of people. Beyond that, as you may know, I have in the past resisted the idea that the concept of organizational routine required a sharp definition. It's out there in the world. No kid never ever learned to recognize a doggy by reading a precise definition of a doggy. Somebody pointed out the doggy, and that actually, the running through the examples is actually the best way to understand the potential reach of the concept. And I have said, so that what you ought to think about is you ought to think about the attributes you're looking for. You're looking for repetitiveness, multi-person, relatively automatic, that is to say, more complexity in the performance than is signaled in the initiation, relatively reliable relative to context in terms of producing results. Those are kinds of attributes you can try to assign or look for in the world, and I think that's a better guide than an attempted sharp definition.
Also in your book you mentioned that routines perform an important role of being kind of a truce in the organization. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by the truce?
Absolutely. I'll reveal the historical background of the idea of routine as truce, which is that I was sitting in a faculty meeting at the Yale School of Management one time, and there was a discussion underway about the possible change of the curriculum. And with the change of the curriculum would become with some new assignments of teaching credit and some new teaching credit for various subgroups within the faculty. And this discussion becomes extremely heated. People are not at all willing to consider easily the notion that their course might be removed from the core or something like that. And so it's this rather heated discussion, and level of conflict within the group appears. And I'm thinking, why is that? And that I started to think about this fact, that is that when a lot of questions which involve conflicting interests within the organization get worked out in the process of settling a routine, and once they're settled, then it takes on this truce character, which means that on the one hand it tends to go forward, but on the other hand, when somebody makes a move that looks like a breaking of the truce, everybody else may get upset quickly, and they may get upset in what appears to be irrationally, in the sense you can't immediately see what the stake is that is behind the upset. So that was actually the starting point of my thinking about that. And I have to say that there's the paper by Zubracki and Bergen on routine as truce in last year's Organization Science, September, I think. Very good paper on routines as truce. I recommend it if anybody wants to explore that.
So let's talk now about the organizational size. In your work, Professor, you said that the size of the organization is a very important dimension. And here actually I have two questions to the audience. How many of you would agree that the biggest organizations in terms of revenue are also the biggest organizations in terms of employment? I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. But could you guess, in terms of the biggest 1,000 companies in US in terms of revenue, what would be the ratio between the biggest company in terms of employees and the smallest one? Be 1 to 10 or 1 to 100? So in fact, these organizations are massive. So this is just a sample from the Fortune 1000, and you can see that ranging from a small country size in terms of Walmart to a small principality, maybe somewhere in Europe. But in terms of ratio in this Fortune 1000 companies, so these are still companies who have revenues in billions of dollars, actually the ratio is closer to 1 to 25,000. So size seems to be a very important dimension in how we view the organizations. So in terms of the size of the organization and knowledge, what effect has the organizational size on organizational knowledge?
That's a question that really needs emphasis, I think, because as you suggest, terms like big employer, large firm, etc., which are very commonly encountered, might lead us to believe that there is actually a category of some kind like that within which firms are reasonably homogeneous. And when there is a factor of 25,000 in size between the top and the bottom, of a category, I think one has to have some doubt about how homogeneous that category could actually be. And that makes a lot of difference from the point of view of the knowledge issues. Let me mention two key kinds of difference. The first difference is that, as we said, organizational knowledge is distributed in the organization, and the larger the organization, the more that the fact that it's distributed means that it's pretty hard to have it all in view in some sense, and have a sense of what the totality is and what its internal relations are. And then the second point is there's a fundamental point about informational economies of scale. It says, the term is information or knowledge is non-rivalrous in use. You don't have to create the original again in order to use it again. And that fact means that for anything involving information or knowledge, scale is potentially a tremendous advantage. And large companies can carry, there I go, right there, I used the category. Large companies can afford activities in the knowledge domain which are far beyond the means of the small companies, and get much greater economic benefit from them because they can apply the resulting knowledge on a very large scale. So that means that that in terms of who's positioned to do frontier R&D in terms of being able to carry the cost and ultimately benefit, carry the cost and the risk and maybe ultimately benefit, who's positioned to have strong dynamic capabilities, alert to the changing environment and looking for the new opportunities and the new threats. Well, those are things that have costs, and those costs are more or less create benefits for the organization as a whole, and therefore they are much more easily borne in large organizations. And sometimes, some of that we see those advantages clearly reflected. Sometimes I think the large organizations underestimate the power of that fact and don't do as much as they could with the intrinsic economic advantage that they have.
Professor Winter, also within this subject, we know that size tends to go hand in hand with diversification. So what would be the consequences of diversification to organizational knowledge?
Well, diversification creates, as I said, a more extreme form of the issues associated with the fact that knowledge is distributed in the organization. And so that means that so far as any knowledge issue is concerned, managing the organization as a whole is going to tend to get harder and harder the more diversified that organization is, right? So there are organizational responses to that challenge of various kinds. One of them which is to kind of, in some sense, keep the top management out of the knowledge business related to the divisions and let them focus on other functions. And then another thing which I should mention is that the character of the diversification matters, because there's related diversification and unrelated diversification in many degrees. And David Bryce and I have actually got a paper on the underlying logic of capabilities and diversification, which he's presenting tomorrow, I think, tomorrow afternoon. So I thought I should throw in the plug for that.
Up until now, we've been talking about knowledge as a static entity, but we know that it's in a permanent state of flux. So, how does organizational knowledge or productive knowledge change?
Well, so it changes in a variety of ways. So, there's two major categories I would offer. There's first all the deliberate processes of knowledge change, where somebody in a managerial role is trying to change the organization's knowledge situation, and that would include acquisitions aimed at knowledge acquisition, which is what the Bryson Winter paper is about. It includes the deliberate learning through a sequence of enactments of a similar task, like a replication task or acquisitions or something like that, which Maurizio Zolo and I wrote about under the heading of deliberate learning. And then there's the category of automatic or accidental things, which are knowledge changes that aren't the ones that are being orchestrated. And those include the simple forms of learning by doing, which simple repetition improves skills, and it includes the accidental things, the accidental mutations to the routines, the effects of entry and exit into the labor force on the knowledge and that sort of thing.
And from those two processes, one is deliberate, the other one is accidental. I mean, what is your hunch? Which one is actually have more influence on how the knowledge changes in organizations?
That's a very good question. I think if we looked at that question in the context of sort of economic history on a fairly large scale, what you see is a lot of deliberate activity creating new starting points or new templates, they would say, for the future in terms of devices, in terms of organizational forms, and so on. And then you see a continuing elaboration and extension of application of those original innovations. And in the latter process, there is a big role for the automatic and the accidental, which can easily be missed. How much actually is happening at that level? There's something called the Horndal effect, I think it is, which is the expression of that point in manufacturing productivity. So they're both quite important.
So we also know that knowledge and innovation are somehow related. And this question comes actually from one of the members of the audience that we received earlier. And the question asks if innovation, something that usually people think of as an accidental process, a bliss or eureka moment, is the innovation the characteristic of an individual or of the organization? Can the organization learn to innovate? Can it develop somehow of a innovation learning curve?
Well, both individuals and organizations can learn a great many things that are obviously very useful to innovation. Indeed, it's hard to think of many innovations of any consequence that didn't have a long list of prerequisites in terms of command of the underlying knowledge and technologies and so on that go into this particular advance. So there is, as in going through a college curriculum, probably if you want to get to a point where you could innovate, you have to acquire a lot of these prerequisites. And after that, there's the question of a lot of relatively methodical, deliberate effort eliminating bad alternatives along the path. That's probably a lot of what Edison was talking about when he said that invention is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Mostly it's the hard work part. And then after you say all that, then at the end, almost by definition of innovation is involving novelty, there has to be some of this creative spark thing. There has to be some significant reorganizing of the available materials and the achievement of a new solution. But my opinion is that the creative spark is considerably overemphasized in current discussions of innovation as against these background facts, the social process of accumulation of knowledge, which sets the platforms from which people make further steps forward. and just the role of the preparation and perspiration that I already referred to. So I call this the cult of the light bulb. You know, there's the aha light bulb, and the cult of the light bulb thinks that the innovation is coming from sparks affecting individual minds. And whereas those, as I just said, those sparks, of course, are important and a necessary ingredient, but look at everything else. Look at everything else that is also a necessary ingredient and is much more social, much more cumulative, much less, you know, exotic than the flash of creativity can be. And I think, in general, we tend to neglect those things, right? So the first point is so you can certainly learn to innovate in the sense that you can take your prerequisite steps, right? You can set the stage for things, and that's not any contradiction to the idea of innovation. You can also learn to organize innovation better than it was organized before. So in the end, I think that clearly the answer is yes. It is possible to learn to innovate, notwithstanding the necessary element of the creative sparks. And that is what is going on, and what we talk about under the heading of dynamic capability to a large extent, is that is a learned capacity to carry out innovation. As for the curve, you know, I'm not sure that anybody has placed the record. You could do that. The record in a sort of a learning curve perspective so much. We've come closer to that in the replication studies. Maybe I'm just unaware of that, but that is something one could do. I think there certainly is a measurable progress that could be established, but it's a little complicated to do it, probably.
We've been talking about this issue of knowledge change in the context of organizations, and I would like to steer the conversation regarding what's the role of individuals here. Common sense tells us that individuals are often resistors to change. There's even the saying that the only people that like change are wet babies. But there are also people inside organizations that are drivers of change. What drives the wedge between both? What's the distinction between the two categories?
I think there really is a big element of it, individual differences in that picture. That some people, I think it's pretty clear, some people are more exploratory, more adventurous, more willing to venture into the unknown than other people are, and that is probably a very large factor in the situation. But it's not the only factor, because opportunities, you know, opportunities come to people. It's not just the attributes of the people that matter. People are embedded in situations, in organizations, and in history, and so there is some element of being properly positioned to actually see the opportunity to make the organization change. And I think, again, that is probably a big factor. The difficulty, you know, of making the organization change, I think there's the metaphor of turning a large ship, you know, which is a slow and in some sense costly process. One part of the inertia that makes a large organizational ship hard to turn is the inertia associated with the commitments to the established routines. There are other sources of inertia, but that is certainly one source. So when we're looking for, if we're looking for interesting stories about individuals and their roles in change, or the changing paths of organizations, there's a theoretical interest in the question of whether somebody actually got a ship to turn or not, right? Because there are ways of creating the appearance of a turning ship that do not actually involve a turning ship. And one of those is that if you're the management of a large corporation, you may be able to locate a different ship already headed in the right direction, and just move your command flag over to that other ship and paint the old name on the stern, and now you've made a major change of corporate direction. Now that may be I'm not knocking it. I'm not saying that's the wrong thing to do. Not saying that top management should not take pride in doing that occasionally, but and it may be, it may be good for the shareholders, but it's not turning a ship, right? So from a knowledge point of view, if you say, well, the inertia is partly there because of the knowledge role and the commitments to the routines. If we're looking at examples, the first thing we got to do is see through this layer of complexity and see whether it's actually an example of a ship turning or not. And I think that's a very useful way to think about the change. Yeah.
And in terms of the individuals as the agents of change or resistors, is there any difference between where they are in the organization? So we see the individuals that kind of bubble up from like the front lines, like the post-it note, someone in the laboratory, someone makes a mistake, and then there are those big changes that you just alluded to. Is there a difference between the position?
Well, certainly people at different levels have characteristically different sorts of opportunities come past them, and it is pretty well known that if you are several layers down, and it is your idea to turn the whole ship, that it is quite possibly the case that you will be frustrated in this endeavor. So the opportunity to actually make a change in the direction of the whole ship tend to reside rather naturally among people on the bridge. But other important opportunities, like the one you mentioned with the post-it notes, occur farther down. And then how the organization responds is crucial to whether the value of that initiative for change is actually going to be captured or not.
Maybe let's now turn into the topic of your career and how it unfolded. So, I mean, your book, the one that you're most famous for, and the one with the biggest citations, it became a widely popular, and not only in terms of number of citations, which is just mind-boggling, but also in terms of the variety of fields that took something from it. So I think that you mentioned once a study that identified that it was 387 different journals that cited your work, including 2 in physics and I think 1 federal parole.
That's right.
So that's quite a widespread. But when your book came out, it actually challenged a lot of the key traditional economics principles. Could you tell us a little more about the differences between the evolutionary economics as presented in the book and the traditional economic theory?
I'd be happy to do that, but before I do, let me say that when we talk about my book, there's this other guy. Here's Dick Nelson, and this was a very, very real collaboration. There's nothing, as we say in the preface, there's nothing in the book that has not had a hand from both of us, right? And although the proportions vary from chapter to chapter. So Dick in particular, as I've written elsewhere, Dick in particular was very important in bringing the whole inquiry more into the domain where we're mostly talking about it, which is, innovation, technological progress, and so on, as a topic that could be illuminated from the micro level if you had a better theory of firms or organizations as a starting point for that theory. So So the task, in that book was to, as the title says, the task is to approach things in the spirit of trying to understand change, and in particular, pretty large-scale, important change and historical change. So, with that said, so then what is the nature of the challenge to the standard microeconomics? Well, we said in chapter 3 in the book that there are 3 key questions to be asked and about knowledge in the firm. And those 3 questions are: where does the knowledge reside? That is the distribution question, and that is the shared learning question, and that is what is the role of the memory support of the artifacts question, and so forth. Right. So where does the knowledge reside? And is that question illuminated by the concept of production function, production set, or anything you can find in the microeconomics textbook? Answer is clearly no. The second question is, what would account for a sharp boundary or a sharp distinction between things that are known and things that are unknown? Why is there a cliff edge there? And isn't it the case that it is always possible to say, perhaps there is a better way of doing this? And if you raise the question of whether there is a better way of doing something, then in many cases it will prove in the end that yes, there is a better way. But between recognizing that there might be and finding the better way, there is a lot of cost and uncertainty and time and so on, as we have already suggested. And those considerations suggest in reality that universally there is no such sharp edge to what is well known. There is a pretty sharp edge. Say, if you want a sharp edge, it's the edge of what is frequently practiced, which is to say the edge of common frequent exercise of the underlying skills and routines. That's a pretty sharp edge. When you go off of that edge, you make a really noticeable change. But the production function and production sets concepts of the books don't help you. They have sharp edges. They don't have anything to say about maybe there's a better idea, and that the thought that there could be a better idea should be inside the theory, not something that is brought in later. And then the last one is the system relations, the relationship of the knowledge of the firm to the knowledge of other firms, and its relationship of the knowledge of the firm to underlying engineering and science and marketing research and whatnot. So again, in the formalism, I'm not talking about the common sense of good microeconomists, which is a completely different discussion. I'm talking about the formalism that they put in the books in order to instruct the young about these matters. And in that formalism, there is very, very little room for the idea that knowledge gets fed from underlying science and advances in engineering, and it gets fed from other industries, and it gets fed from other firms, and that these knowledge flows are a very big, important part of the story. So in the evolutionary approach, our first task is to make room for those things, have a story about where the knowledge resides, get away from the sharp edges, acknowledge the knowledge flows in the system. And that is basically what the program that's carried out in that book, and it means that the underlying view of the firm is just radically different than it is in the textbook.
Well, as you mentioned, your program is a radical change, and we could just say that it's a paradigm shift regarding neoclassical economics, and you might have had some challenges getting the message across. Would you mind sharing some stories with us?
Well, the early stories were mostly pretty good. The contribution was received at least politely, and it was favorably reviewed in the few significant reviews that it got. There's one review that went on for of many pages that said it was more or less it's the greatest book I ever read in paragraph 1, and then the rest of the review was devoted to taking it apart. But you know that's the reviewer's privilege. Okay, so it was, as I say, pretty polite at the start, and the problem was not so much hostility as indifference, right? The paradigm shift you refer to wasn't going to happen easily. Indeed, the first few years, do you still have the, yeah, well, those first few years seemed a little discouraging there. But then as time went by, and perhaps as some of this momentum started to build a little bit, I think we started to more frequently encounter outright hostility, right? So later on, two of my friends, Giovanni Dossi and Yuri Kanievsky, and I submitted a paper to a very prominent economics journal, a very A+ type theoretical economics journal. And we got the courtesy of a very prompt rejection, and there were two reviewers with two very short reviews, and the first reviewer said, "This paper should not be published in this journal, or for that matter, anyplace else." That was the first review in its entirety. Okay, so that's a concise review. And then the second review was much more friendly, because that second reviewer kind of he thought the mathematical innovations in the paper were interesting, but he recognized that the mathematical innovations were not associated with economic ideas, which were approved. So what he said was, couldn't you just throw in some Bellman equations? Well, if you know what Bellman equations are, what that translates are, is it says, couldn't you just follow the usual intertemporal optimization approach that we economists think is the right approach, right? So he would have been happy to have the math, but not without the Bellman equations. And there more recently, I could go on about this, and more recently, so I think there is, yes, some noticeable stress there with some part of the mainstream discipline. I have to say the mainstream discipline has ragged edges and zones of heresy within it and so on, so we don't get too simplistic about this kind of story. But anyway, there is the picture that you suggest.
So let's move right now to the implications for managers of the nature of organizational knowledge. From what we've talked so far, I mean, it seems like it's very complex phenomena. It's hard to grasp. So what are the common pitfalls that managers face in terms of managing, given the nature of productive knowledge?
There are certainly some very real hazards. One hazard is that there's kind of an overconfidence hazard at the top level, which goes right back to the first point about why the term productive knowledge, right? It goes back to the point that for an awful lot of real-world production activity, the concern with the depth of your understanding of why anything works is decidedly limited, right? Because the question, as previously said, is, does it work here now? Can we sell the thing and make money doing it? Because of that lack of concern with depth, that means that there is a hazard underneath which says, yes, but if it's just local here and now, what about tomorrow? And what about someplace else? And that is the kind of issue that comes up in the replication studies. And Gabriel and I had a paper in the Harvard Business Review talking in part about these kind of overconfidence issues, imagining that because you can do it, you know how to do it. Wrong, very wrong. And that encourages, some excessive boldness with respect to and a lack of attention to the hazards. So that's one thing. And then another thing is, of course, the distributed character, as we said before, which is that it's very hard in a substantial organization to appreciate from the top what it is that this organization could do given its knowledge resources, right? Given all the diverse knowledge distributed as it is in the organization, what is the repertoire of things that the organization could possibly do? Well, that is a combinatoric story. That is a much more complicated phenomenon than anything it is actually doing. So out of the interest of cognitive simplicity, there's a tendency to think about what we can do very much in terms of what we actually do, which means very frequently an emphasis on products and maybe on the reputations that those products have gained, the markets that they have been successful in, and to organize their understanding of possibility under those headings. When possibility is organized under those headings, you don't see the opportunities that will be found if you drill deeper and tried to understand more about what the organization could actually do, as opposed to the things it now does as organized into its existing offerings in the marketplace. So I think there's that problem of having what we call a capability-based understanding of possibility and opportunity, which is a characteristic hazard. Maybe just one more, and that is, as noted before, the individual heads are not the only part of the organizational knowledge story, but they are sometimes quite important. So it is quite possible to have a setback for the organization of a significant kind because you lost some of the knowledge that was residing in particular heads and those people went elsewhere. And that can happen both at the top and down at the bottom.
You just mentioned that sort of dichotomy between what should be capability-based logic and what normally happens in practice, which is a product and market-driven logic. I'm just trying to kind of provoke you right now. What about if managers say, well, I can just buy those competencies in the market?
Yes.
And keep thinking the way I do.
Yes. A common point of view, I think, actually. And so there we come back to fundamentals of the resource-based view, and in particular to Jay Barney's critique of strategic factor market stories. And so on the one hand, it's clear that indeed it is possible to bring in new capabilities into the organization by making an appropriate acquisition. Another plug for the Bryce Winter paper tomorrow. So that's clear, and it's often advantageous. But as Jay correctly pointed out, there is a tendency to imagine or to expect, there should be a tendency to expect, that things which are being transacted in the market are roughly reasonably priced. And reasonably priced in this connection means that the capabilities which are being transacted are priced at a level which will result in their yielding only a normal return. And therefore, if you are in a search for an extraordinary return, you either have to have a genuine synergy story, as against the many phony synergy stories that are put forward in defense of acquisitions. You need a genuine synergy story, or you need a capability in its own right of being, in effect, a great trader. Of being able to see a price that is out of line and to arbitrage that market, even though it's capabilities and not commodities. So there are ways, certainly to profit from acquisition, reasonable strategies involving acquisition, but there's also the hazard that when you buy it, it might be priced right. And by contrast then, and this also is really could be regarded as implicit in Jay's story, by contrast, that exercise of thinking within our organization about what can be done with the stuff that we already more or less know how to do by rearranging, rewiring, and getting to new routines, those things are not visible, not traded in the market, and then therefore in that dimension are a more promising path to profit than the acquisition path.
So you just mentioned, we were just talking about the decision to enter new markets, and that seems to be a challenge in itself. But now, what about, as alluded to before, the complete change of strategic direction that a firm might want to enact? We have several examples. We have Nokia in the 80s and 90s went from rubber boots production to cable and switchgear, and now telecommunications. We have IBM with Lou Gerstner switching from an IT manufacturing company to IT consulting. Now HP, no one knows. And so the question will be, if entering new markets is already challenging enough, what about switching strategic direction?
Right. Well, that's the turning the ship metaphor, and as I suggested, we need to make the distinction between actually turning a ship and getting on some different ship. And actually, with the Nokia case, I think there is a substantial element of getting on some different ship, and in particular the way the story unfolded, originally from paper, I think, if you went back earlier than that, from paper to rubber products to cable to quite a large assortment of different businesses. And when you get to 1970, early 1980s, you've got really a significantly diversified conglomerate there. And then during the 90s, a refocus, and you come back to telecommunications. So in the ship metaphor, that's quite a story. We started off this one little ship, we got another ship, we got a few more ships, we got a whole fleet of ships. We sold off a bunch of the ships and wound up with the Nokia flag on a fairly focused, significantly focused telecommunications enterprise. And so there's a part of that story that is the redeployment, how they got into electronics and the early capabilities and so on, which is in the flavor of the redeployment and is, in that sense, a genuine turn of the ship. But on the other hand, the story in the large is an awful lot of changing ships. Now, let me talk a little bit about IBM. So IBM was then in crisis, right, at the start of that period that you put on there, and the crisis was from the failure to appreciate the structural change that was going on in the computer market and the associated structural change in the vertical structure and the structure of the market, part of which was itself incidental to to IBM's failure, IBM's endorsement of the open standard, with the result that IBM Compatible became so influential. So they were in terrible shape, and I have to watch the time a little bit here. There's a story, my friend Larry Prusak, something of a knowledge expert, used to tell about how he told, he asked some member of the IBM board how it had been that such a great information company as IBM had seemingly been caught blindsided by the changes in the computer market. And to which the response is, at the board level, we didn't really know it was happening. To which Larry says, he replied, "You didn't know it was happening? My dog knew it was happening." So there's a curious kind of a story about failed vision there. But so they weather that, and they weather it. In this case, part of the ship that was headed in the wrong direction disappeared from the company, right? And then we grow the rest of the ship, the services and the consulting and all that. So that's that story. But I would refer you to the earlier episode, the transformation of IBM from a business machine company to the leading electronic computer company, and that episode from the late 30s to the 50s, with the aid of a lot of government contracting, that episode, it may be one of the most convincing turn the ship episodes there is. They really did redeploy a lot of existing capabilities, and going from an electromechanical business machine company to an electromechanical computing company to an electronic computing company. And that story is told in a paper by Steve Usselman, U-S-S-E-L-M-A-N, in a business history journal. That's a very good story for this purpose.
So, Professor, given the broad range of topics that exist under the banner organizational knowledge, you seem to spend quite a bit of time on the replications issues. Is there a particular reason for that?
There's a first leading reason, which is replication in a general sense is a key element of a broad class of evolutionary theories. Depends on how you use the word evolutionary, but certainly biological evolutionary theories as well as economic ones. We talk about variation, selection, retention. Well, the retention across time almost always involves replication. So it had been my intention from the days of writing the book to get into the question of what is really going on behind the idea that organizations can replicate their routines, which we had, frankly, introduced into the theory because the theory needed it. So having thus introduced it into the theory, is that, well, perhaps that should be looked into a little bit. So not much happened, though, on that front until, fortunately, Gabriel Zelansky got interested in this question. And when we were working together for a while, I think we learned quite a lot about that set of issues. And so we turned our attention toward replicator organizations, the organizations that not only replicate their routines, but are fairly clearly defined strategically by their competence at replicating their routines in space. There's a large class of organizations like that. And the replicator organizations are the second reason why the topic is important, and that is those replicator organizations are a very big factor in the world. They are shaping the world in a very significant way, most obviously in retail, hotels, etc. but also less obviously in a lot of different spheres. So that's the second reason, and then the third reason is that it's a great laboratory for organizational knowledge, for studying organizational knowledge issues, because on the one hand, you've clearly got the routines. You know, there's no question about these fast food chain organizations, you know, having very, very firmly established nominal routines, and those are the ones that are supposed to happen, and then the actual routines, the behavioral patterns that are largely shaped by those nominal routines. The routines are really there. They really change. They really get replicated. Those are all very observable things in the reality. And I think the last thing I would add is, if you imagine that there was no room for the light bulb, if there's no room for the creative aha, just because we're trying to do something over again instead of trying to do something new, that's quite wrong, because you're trying to do something that was done someplace else in a new environment, which will present new and different challenges and which will require some light bulbs lighting up in order for the incidental problems there to be solved. So actually that's another one of my themes, which is across the full spectrum, there's always a mix of practiced behaviors and creative ones of novelty and adherence to previous returns and routines, and we would do better to recognize that and try to parse the mix rather than try to make sharp distinctions between the ends of it.
So this question is about the outsourcing, which is a trend that is very well established nowadays, but whose knowledge consequences are not that well discussed. And we would like to know what are if you had to underline some of the issues, what are the perils of outsourcing, and how important is it to be selective with what to outsource or not, or having?
There are definitely perils, and actually there was the article, The Core Competence of the Corporation, Prahalad and Hamel, HBR 1990. Something like that, which was for a time the most heavily cited or reprinted, the most reprinted HBR article, and it's a very interesting thing. It was cited so much. You went back and read it, you sometimes might start to worry a little bit about some of those citations, and actually that's also true of Nelson and Winter. How did all these citations actually happen? But one of the points they were making was exactly that point, the point of the hazards of deciding that you could outsource a key component, a strategically important component, and buy it from somebody else and not have a strategic consequence. In that the capability development shifts to the supplier, it dies in-house, and if the supplier is aggressive enough about exploiting that opportunity and the component is key enough, that can prove to be a disaster, and that is always there. Now, I think maybe it's due to that article. I think that that point is really quite widely recognized. That is to say, if you're buying the thing instead of making it yourself, unless that domain, that technology, whatever it is unusually static, You have to be very alert to the possibility that the progress will happen in the supplier and that you will not be able to share in it, and you will not be able to reverse the step of having outsourced it, right? So I think that hazard is actually pretty well recognized, and there is some literature. My collaborator Michael Jacobitis has a paper, not with me, a very good paper on tapered integration, which is one of the partial solutions to this this set of issues. So that original basic hazard, I haven't attempted to take a census of it. My sense it is recognized to a degree that management responses are more common. But what is the management response? Because because of the enormous advantages of the outsourcing itself, for a variety of reasons, many corporations wind up being as much or more orchestrators of supply chains as they are producers, and that's probably, we could probably say, HP that we just had up on the board, a leading manufacturer of personal computers. Well, yeah, maybe let's look into that and see exactly what is happening where, because I'm sure that as in that case and in Apple and many other cases, if you look into it, you see the dramatic global distribution of the capabilities and that underlie the supplies. Really, you come back to the strategic decision to outsource something. In many cases, there will not be a easy managerial answer to the question: how do we maintain competence in being able to trade in this market well, much less make the device ourselves, right? Because to be a good buyer, you have to know something about what's going on. And so there is a capability there of being a good buyer, which is linked to the underlying production capability. Now, how do you do that? How do you hold on to the option of maybe trying to reverse the step? Possibly that's so implausible you actually can't. So that means that the decision to outsource is a decision to exit the competence permanently, and ought to be seen in that light. Right?
So we are almost nearing the end of the interview, but we have the last question we wanted to ask you. Given the characteristics of the knowledge that you just described, that it's distributed, that the top management does not really know everything that's happening in the organization, that the choices are not fully known, is managing an organization more of a lack or a skill?
Luck, I've said, luck is being in the right place at the right time with the right capabilities. So as far as the right place and the right time part of luck is concerned, there is, a lot of chance in that part. As far as the right capabilities is concerned, that, as previously noted, is a matter on which a lot of useful effort can be expended. So I think that is, the best way to think about how luck operates in these competitive situations. And you could say luck is often nature's way of deciding matters that haven't been decided otherwise, right? So it is the matter, when you try to balance the coin temporarily on its edge, you have a chance device. The nature has not quite decided which way it should fall. That's the chance device, and also for flipping and so on. So what does that say? That says if you want to win at something, the first task is to make sure that you aren't systematically a loser. You have to figure out how it is that you get into contention in this situation so that luck will have its chance. Actually, there's this story about how to win the lottery, and the point is the first instruction is buy a ticket. You know, so you have to be in a position to have luck play its favorable role, and that often will be a matter of a lot of systematic effort. And it's that consideration so visible at the level of in sports at the championship level that makes it so much fun to watch, right? Because you see clashes in great cases like the recent World Series in the U.S. You see clashes between teams of extraordinarily high competence, and part of the fun is watching that high competence, and then another part of the fun is not knowing how it's going to turn out, because it turns out in ways that depend on very small matters, which is to say they are a matter of luck.
So this concludes our interview. We're sorry we couldn't bring all the questions that we received from the audience, but feel free to just approach Professor Winter after the session. And from us, we would like to thank you, Professor Winter, for sharing your ideas with us today, and hope to see you around.
Thank you.